2. Great. So before we get started, let's make sure that we're recording this session first. Okay, thank you, Leandro. My name is Brian Baracina. I will be the trainer presenting today. And the topic I'm going to share on the screen right now. Just put this in presentation mode. And we will get started right away. And hold on one second. I believe now it's much better for you guys as well. Leandro, you can see the screen fine? Okay, perfect. Okay, yesterday you had the pleasure to enjoy Leandro's training during the WebEx for UNOE. Today I will be providing the session for COE, Transportation Management. We'll see that some of the processes are similar, but others are completely different. And before I get started, I also want to make sure I explain some simple things about the WebEx. So please remember, as we did yesterday, you can use the chat to communicate with us if you're having an audio issue or any other type of issue. Now, if you want to raise a question, the best option would be to select the Q&A icon in the WebEx. It's quite easy to find if you search through the navigational menu, where usually it could be at the top of your screen, bottom of your screen, to the right of your screen, where you have the participants list, the chat, and then something called Q&A. That would be the best place to write your questions in so we can compile them at the end of the session. And then we can send them back to you by the end of the week. We're compiling them every day, so whatever we discussed yesterday and was not answered 100%, or even those that were answered, are going to be part of this Q&A list that's going to belong strictly to the distance learning portion. By Friday, when we have compiled the entire list, we'll send an email to you, so you have the discussions of day 2, day 3, and day 4 in a nice document altogether. The other thing is Leandro will be the one answering the chat, so if you could direct your messages to the host, where you see Leandro Taberner as the host today, you can just select, instead of all participants or just to me, the presenter, you can just send it to Leandro, and that would make our lives quite easier. I believe that's everything I wanted to mention before I get started. And now, with relation to the presentation we are about to go over today. COE Transportation Management, as you can see on the screen here. And I'm just going to get rid now of this so I can see better what I'm doing and ensure I have my marker ready. And the highlighters here. Very good. Let me just check it's working. So today's presentation, COE Transportation Management, and everything seems to be working just fine. Okay, the process we're about to go over, especially the beginning part of the process, I want you all to know that before I start talking about it, it's still something in the works. So I know that some of you that have already been testing this environment during the pit have also maybe not been very familiar with it, or are not very convinced about it. Just so you know, this is something I know Babacar is also talking to Umoja about. It's a work in progress, but right now it's the system or the process we must follow. So that's why we are delivering this training and we're covering this specific topic today. Once I get started, I'll let you know exactly what it is. But just so you know, this is something that is in the works and may change eventually in the future, but right now this is the process we have to become familiar with. So let's get started with something you may be familiar with if you were in yesterday's session, which is what we call our poster or our guide, something we're going to be using also during the training in New York, so you guys have a visual of what we're talking about. We've tried to compile the entire training in somewhat what we call a cheat sheet of processes. Yesterday you saw the one for UNOE, so it looks a little bit different from the one you're going to be seeing today. And you can see right from the beginning here, load list. When yesterday we were starting with procure, we were raising a shopping cart. In this case, of course, we're not going to be raising a shopping cart. So one of our first steps will be the load list. And this, of course, is for COE. In our cheat sheet, the one that encompasses everything, we've mixed it all together, but today, since we're only following this process, you will not be seeing the procurement side or the shopping cart side of the goods, at least during this part of the presentation. We, of course, still have the planning stage, In today's case, we're going to be covering the TCC stage for LOA, the freight forwarder stage for non-LOA, as you can see, and these are the stages and the things we're going to cover simply for today's presentation. We'll also have, again, like we saw yesterday, the procurement freight stage for non-LOA, and now I'll go one by one just to give an overview of what each one is. And again, our execute and monitor stage for TCC, LOA, and also for the freight forwarder stage, non-LOA. So we will first be starting this presentation with a load list. If you're not familiar with it, we're going to become quite familiar with it. Load list that we're going to have to complete from the information in our cargo list. We're going to have to update this load list with the information in the cargo list, and this is what we're going to be uploading to TM. So it's a completely different process from what we were seeing yesterday, and we'll go one by one on the slides later on to see what this means exactly. In the planning stage, if you were here in yesterday's session, fine. If not, then today just become familiar with the fact that we will have two different stages completely, right? The TCC stage for LOA, which is the equivalent of the Incoterm DAP, and then the freight forwarder stage for the non-LOA, which is the equivalent to the Incoterm XWorks. So of course, depending on if it's LOA or non-LOA, the process will be different in TM in terms of planning. Now, for the procure freight stage, will only be affected by the non-LOA, of course, not the LOA, where we'll have to raise a shopping cart for the freight. And we'll go back to SRM. So this is a very similar stage to yesterday. So you'll realize that for this part of the process, if you were in yesterday's session, there are a lot of similarities, if not exactly the same. And then again, finally, the execute and monitor stage, where it's quite different from yesterday as well. You have the TCC stage for LOA, again, DAP Incoterm, and who will be involved and in what system will be used to report the events, right, or submit the events and also add the attachments. And again, for the freight forwarder stage, non-LOA or XWorks Incoterm, and who will be involved in what module they'll be using to submit events and add attachments. So this is just a general look at what we're going to be covering in today's presentation. And now we'll go in section by section covering the details of this. I believe there may not be any questions yet, right, Leandro? Okay, so I'll continue.
Yeah, no question at this time. Thank you, Brian.
All right, perfect. Okay, so as I was mentioning first, our first stage, and what we're going to be covering firsthand is the update Excel load list, or the load list, which occurs, of course, offline. In this case, we haven't signaled or given it a role because, again, it's not, let's say, we don't know exactly the person who will be doing this in the team because since it's not in the system, there's really no role needed to be doing this. So we just left it here as an action point that will happen offline. Again, you're going to be filling in an Excel sheet, populating it with the information from the cargo list. Okay, we can move on to our first slide of details. Again, here to my top left side of the screen, you'll always have the step that we are in, right? The step that we're covering in this cheat sheet or poster that I just, that was in the previous slide before this one. So we're focusing on the Excel right now in this slide here. So again, the following output from the Memorandum of Understanding between the contingency and the United Nations will be used to initiate the transportation process. Okay, so anything that's in this Excel load list comes from our cargo load list. And what is important here, what I want to make sure we cover, is that TM is not a travel management system, as you can see here. So only the information relevant for transportation purposes will be uploaded to TM, and only the contents of the cargo list, which are summarized, and that's very important because it's not detail by detail exactly the same in the cargo list and it will look in the load list. The load list is a sort of a summary of what we have in our cargo list with really the key information or the things that we need in order to manage the transportation in TM. Now, again, as I'm saying, this is a work in progress, and Babacar was talking to Umoja, so eventually the process may change, may become easier, may become faster in the future, but eventually we have to stick to what we have today, so that's what I'm covering. So some of the data should be cross-referenced in TM. This is for now. Eventually in the future it may not be the case, and I'll explain that in a little bit as well. So some of the data that we add to our load list may have to be cross-referenced in TM, because in TM it's probably represented by a code, right? Letters and numbers that represent maybe a location, right, or a consignee, or a business partner. We'll see that in a bit as well. So one of the main differences, or some of the main differences between what we saw yesterday, UNOE, and what we're going to see today, COE. So one of the first things, and probably the most important, is that there is no integration with ECC. So we did see yesterday, Leandro was explaining very well that eventually there's an integration with ECC in terms of the inbound delivery document, right? That once it is processed, automatically generates the DTR. In this case, of course, we're not going to be going into ECC. As I'm mentioning, this Excel list is offline. What we do with this Excel list is upload it in Umoja, but there is no integration with ECC. Then we have to prepare our load list as well. And this load list has several sections, several fields, and some things that we have to focus on, like, for example, the load list. So inside this load list, there's a field called load list where we have to add this key information here: break bulk, containers, rolling stocks, trailers, vehicles. Okay, these wordings here are actually in the Excel. All we do is add the information from the cargo list in terms of details, weight, price, and other details that we're going to see shortly, as well as the dangerous goods that we see here as well. The item details as weight, volume, and quantity, the delivery locations, source, destination, time, and date, the Incoterms, okay, in our case, DAP for LOA and XWorks for non-LOA. We have to add that to this list as well. And then something that is quite important, and we'll see as well in more detail in the next slides, the forwarding group. And the forwarding group is a column inside this Excel in which we have to add numbers, simple numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. And what these numbers represent is one digit for each different delivery. So remember yesterday when Leandro was explaining the inbound delivery and the delivery date. So depending on the delivery date, there will be a generation of one or more inbounds documents, correct? So if there's 3 different dates, there's 3 different inbound documents. In this case, to have more than one forwarding order, which is what the document is going to be called in TM, we need to add different numbers in this forwarding group column. We'll see that in a bit as well. So each one of these numbers will represent a new document, a new forwarding order document. Okay, the upload list, as we see here, TM, we need to upload it in TM to generate what I was just talking about, the FWO, or the forwarding order, as we have written here. So in this case, it's not called DTR, as you were seeing yesterday for UNOE. It's called FWO, forwarding order. So once we have uploaded this Excel into TM, now we have a forwarding order number. Okay, TM generates as many forwarding orders as forwarding groups added to the load list. So this is what I was explaining before with the forwarding group. So the more numbers we add, the more forwarding orders we'll have. Okay, so that's it for this slide, and I'm going to be moving on. If at any time there's a question, Leandro, or anything, let me know, and I'll stop. Okay, so let's get into the details of this Excel load list. So first thing, the manually updated field in the Excel load list, as we can see here. It's a summary of the cargo load list. So first thing, most importantly, and these are the first columns starting from left to right in the Excel. Okay, the 2 first columns starting from left to right in the Excel. First one called forwarding type, and this is quite important as we will be using this nomenclature here, ZFW1, for COE. I won't spoil tomorrow's WebEx session, but you will be using a different one for troops. For COE, you'll be using ZFW1. So your first column for the entire document should read like this, as we can see here on the screen. ZFW1 representing a forwarding order type for COE. And then we have something else called the service level, which is what we have here in our second column. 3 numbers, 01, 02, 03, which is the priority of transportation requirements. And what does that mean? Well, it's right here. So the service level code 01 will represent a service level description of standard. 02 will be express, and 03 will be high value. Okay, so it just represents the service level, the priority of transportation requirements, which are the numbers right here. So these are the 2 first columns of our Excel, and something we'll have to become familiar with while populating it. Our next slide, as we go through the Excel sheet, we're going to be focusing on the source and destination location, the pickup date and time, and delivery data and time. Let's take a look at what the Excel looks like here. So our 2 first columns, which is what we saw before. So let's say we can cut the Excel here. This is what we just saw, the forwarding order type, service level, and now we begin with the source location and the destination location. So these 2 columns are the 2 first ones here, source and destination location. They are location codes of the source and destination airports. In this case, we can have more than airports, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the destination, source and destination airports. And this is data that we're going to have to cross-reference in TM for now, as the system, as the process is right now. Because, of course, in your cargo list, you will not have these codes, SUJO01 or SUCF01. As you become more familiar with TM, you'll understand that these represent specific locations, right? The source and destination locations. But in the Excel, they have to look like this so that TM understands what the input in this Excel, and it transforms it into something meaningful in TM. Then, of course, the pickup from date and pickup from time, same thing with the delivery, where we will be adding important information, as we can see here. And what's also important in these columns, and something that we've been realizing, is that in the Excel, the month and date are very important, the way we write them. So let's say here we have September, right? 09, September 30th, 2018. It has to be written in this order, because in TM then it becomes the other way around. So the month will be in the middle and the day will be on the left, but just a small detail to go over with you guys. So basically, these are quite important columns that we'll have to manually populate in the Excel before we perform the upload, and the columns of source location and destination location, for now, as the system is right now, we'll have to cross-reference in TM. Okay, so I'm going to be moving on. Again, these are the important fields we just covered. And we'll move on to our next slide, going through another section of this Excel. Okay, so very important, there are 3 columns, the ones you see here below, the product, item type, and item category, which are columns that are somewhat pre-populated. Let's say this information we see here, the load list, and the item type, as well as the item category, the package here. These are all pre-populated in your Excel. Same for break bulk, container, rolling stock, and so on. If you realize at the bottom, the same items for break bulk as we have up here now have a DG at the beginning, right, which is for dangerous goods. So the dangerous goods, the details of the dangerous goods would have to be on this line. Again, remember, it's a summary. So let's say we have a total of 5 items that we have to put under dangerous goods break bulk. We would add the number 5 to this Excel, as we'll see later on. And that would be the total number of dangerous goods for break bulk here in our Excel. The cargo list is a lot more detailed than that. Okay, so we go back to the top line here. This first top line, load list, as we see here, This line remains as is and should be added before product categories that belong to a new forwarding order. Okay, so this line really doesn't have to contain detailed information of the cargo list. It's a line that indicates what type of Excel we're uploading, right? So it's a different line for troops. For COE, this is how the line reads. Load list item type ZLOL. And again, this item type here, this column, and this information that we see here in the screen, these are just technical details for TM. They not necessarily mean something specific, not yet. And I'm sure that once we start digging into the system in New York, we can understand this a bit better. Okay, but just so you know, these are just technical references and nothing specific. Okay, the break bulk, again, we're back to the load list line here, remains as is. So let's say that if we have one forwarding order with a number of details and information, and now we want to add a new forwarding order to the same Excel, we would have to add this line once again and then start with the details one by one. Okay, we'll see the full Excel later on in some of the later screens. Product. So now we're looking at the product. So it's the main categories from the cargo list, okay? And add DG to define dangerous goods. So the product would be, of course, these here: break bulk, container. These are all nomenclatures that we find in the cargo list. And we add DG for dangerous goods. Item type, again, it's a technical description, as I was saying. So for container, we have ZCON. And then the item category will be PRD for product for all of them. So you see this one is actually quite easy. It's the same one for everything in our Excel. And this is what the Excel looks like itself. So it's pretty much what we have seen here on the side. Okay, all the important details that we've been covering so far. And since no one is interrupting to ask a question, I'm just going to continue moving.
Thank you, Brian. So far there are no questions. You might not be able to unmute your microphone, so you can make use of the hands button in case you want to speak up. Okay, so and I will unmute you. Okay, all right. You can also make use of the chat for questions and comments, but so far we didn't see anything in the chat. So thank you, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Leandro. Again, we are still with our Excel. As you can see here, top left corner, this represents where we're still looking at in our presentation. And now a bit of the details, right? Weights, volume, and quantity, right? This example refers to a requirement for 102 vehicles to be transported. So now you'll see what I mean by summary of data. So we again will trace our line here, separating what we have just seen in our screen before, which was the item category, item type, and product. And looking to our right is where we have the details of our cargo list added. So again, it's a summary. As you see here, there's quantity 12 of what? Dangerous goods under the category break bulk. And again, everything else is also a summary. So we have the weight. Again, these are all just details that don't necessarily have to represent reality. Okay, we're just populating the Excel so you know that that's where data would go. The volume and the unit of measure. Okay, so you see, same thing for the container, same thing for rolling stock, and so on. So these are just additions, the summary of everything that was in the cargo list by category. This is how it should look like in your Excel. So you see the first line here, load list, is completely blank. There's nothing to add here in this first line, only on the next stages. And again, when the dangerous goods are over, then the categories just begin once again, but with no DG at the beginning of the words. So I believe this is quite simple and explains well what I was talking about before in terms of categories, dangerous goods, and the summary of the data in the cargo list.
So before we move ahead, we have a question from Edward regarding the role, right? Who is responsible for doing this update, if it's MoveCon or procurement? Okay, so MoveCon. So please, Brian. So who will be responsible for, remember that this step is out of the system, right? So we are just filling in an Excel sheet, all right, and there is no yet an Umoja role, and we will see later on in the presentation which role in the system will be doing the real upload, right? So we'll see that later on in the slides.
Exactly, Leandro, you said it well. So that's why we did not add a role at the beginning of the presentation. As this was occurring offline, it is something that we can't really dictate who will be doing this. I'm not sure if Babacar is already in the actual WebEx as an attendee, if he would like to take a stab at this question. But as Leandro very well said, there is a role for who will be uploading it into TM. But in the sense of who will be updating this Excel,
yeah, if we understand it well, you should, I mean, it's basically MoveCon, okay, but it's not a role in the system, it's more kind of a responsibility, right? But if I'm not mistaken, it should be MoveCon. I mean, moving from the cargo list into this Excel load list, but as Brian mentioned, this is a working process, so the completion or the filling in all the information into Moja, it might change. At this point in time, it's through next upload, but it can change in the future.
Okay, thank you, Leandro. Is that it? Any other questions? Well, I'll move on to the next slide, but if anything comes up, let me know. Okay, so now we're going to concentrate on the forwarding group, default route, and base BTD reference. Okay, so, and we'll see what that means and what it looks like in the Excel. So already getting to the end of our Excel. Audio is fine? Yes? Okay, just had some trouble hearing myself here. Okay, so getting to the end of our Excel, we see that we have the forwarding group, which I was explaining before, and we have a number 1 repeated from top to bottom. So this would represent one single forwarding order in TM. If we had a number 2 or a 3, that means that this Excel would eventually generate 2, 3, 4 different forwarding orders once it's uploaded into TM. Okay, so as we see here, the forwarding group, important when creating multiple forwarding orders, okay, with the same Excel upload sheet. And for the default route, as we see here, only if default route information is already provided. The system will use this default route for the planning. Okay, so far we haven't added any details to that, as we've only been training using this column blank, and still the Excel does not require it. And then this column called the base BTD reference, which is again the MOU reference for COE. So MOU number, future link with wrap system is being developed, but we won't get into that one today. And it's a common reference number between the UN and TCC. Okay, so this number will also have to be added to the Excel, and again, top to bottom, the same number just for the entire Excel sheet. So basically, almost done with the Excel itself, and we'll go with the last part of this Excel before we move on to the next steps in the stage for offline. Again, we're still with the Excel load list offline. Okay, so last but not least, we have columns for the goods value currency, the sales group, which we see here, and I'll explain in a bit. Also a column for the Incoterm that we have to add, of course, according to what we are completing, if it's LOA or non-LOA. The member country or shipper, as it's called in TM, and the receiving plant or consignee, as it's called in TM. So first thing, the goods value for the items, for each of the items. So you see again, it's a summary of the value for maybe the 7 items that were in this line. The sales group is always SG_S02 for the COE process. So you see it's the same top to bottom. And Incoterm, we see DAP for LOA scenario and XWorks for non-LOA scenario. So in this case, all we see is just DAP. We could combine two different Incoterms in one single Excel, but remember, we'd have to add the first line, the load list line, again in between, where we make the difference between the DAP Incoterms and the XWorks Incoterms. And since these would also be two different forwarding orders, we would also have to add the numbers 1, 2, or 3, depending if we want to generate more than one forwarding order. The member country or shipper is the business partner related to the contingency. Again, the reference data, right? We have to cross-reference data in TM so we can have this code. Again, that's at least for now. Then we have the receiving plant of the mission, receiving the equipment, so we cross-reference data in TM. And this is what it looks like, SS10. So SS10 represents unmiss, and this is the code in TM that we would have to cross-reference in TM. Okay? The same thing for the shipper. So again, these two columns are two columns that would not look like that in the cargo list, but we would have to cross-reference that data in the cargo list with TM to be able to give it the accurate, let's say, coding to be able to upload the Excel without errors. And that would be the last of the slides for the Excel load list. If there are any questions before I move on, aside from the role.
Yeah, sorry, Brian. So before we move ahead, we have a question regarding the service level, okay, and the purpose for that field in the Excel sheet, right? If there is any type of purpose, or if there is any kind of impact of that service level in the system. Okay, so as we understand from the documentation we had, it's only for reporting purposes, and then you can prioritize the different forwarding orders depending if they are high priority or not. Okay, but we will confirm that if there is any other impact in the system in regards to that service level field. Okay, so that was the question from Remy regarding the service level, and we also want to make sure that we are collecting all the questions and that we will distribute the official answers to all of them. We also have some comments from Alex regarding the use of this Excel sheet, and there has been some feedback after testing because they submitted some improvements on the process. So as Brian mentioned, so this is a work in process. We are showing to you the current solution that it might change. And we decided to do that because even though the solution will not be 100% the same, the concepts will remain the same, right? So we still have the destination and source locations. We'll still have the different priorities for the forwarding orders. And so that even though the solution might not be the same, you still need to understand the different fields that will be populated in the forwarding order in TM. Okay? So thank you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Leandro. Is that the last one?
Lastly, we have another comment from Alex regarding the goods value in the Excel file that he's indicating that it doesn't apply for LOA. So apparently the goods value doesn't apply for the LOA. So thank you for that, Alex. We will confirm that part too, okay?
Okay. All right, thank you. And is that the last one? I believe so. Okay, so again, thank you guys for your questions, your remarks, and updates. Thank you, Leandro, for the answers to the questions as well. And we can move on now to the next section. So we've seen already the first part of our, let's say, step-by-step or guide to the COE, LOA, and non-LOA end-to-end process. We started with the offline Excel load list, and of course, probably the most tedious work would be done here in the load list specifically. And then once we are done with this process. We focus on TM, or this would be at least the next step once the load list is ready. And it would be, of course, to upload this load list to TM. And here we start having already the role. The TM planner would do this. And eventually, like we were seeing yesterday for UNOE, the action of whether it's LOA or non-LOA would automatically generate, as we see here, the Umoja system, the forwarding orders in TM, and as well automatically create the freight unit. So the action of uploading this Excel load list would create both the forwarding order and the also freight unit, as we can see here. So this is the first part of the end-to-end process for COE, both LOA and non-LOA. So we would always start with this Excel load list offline and then generate our documents in TM by uploading this Excel into TM. We're going to go into the details now for these three processes, which are quite simple, but at least you can become a little more familiar with the terms and concepts before we go into the planning. So here we go, again, to the left, what we're going to cover in this slide, and the details are following up right now. So the forwarding orders we see here will be created in Umoja by uploading the Excel. We've seen that, and the Excel can be uploaded in the Umoja TM backend, similar to ECC, by the TM planner role using the T-code here, as we see here, which will be pretty simple too, because you don't even have to remember. Once you go into TM, you'll have the option to simply double-click on this T-code and take you to the screen that looks like, well, in this case, this would be the result of your upload. So eventually, if you have ever uploaded anything into ECC, any document into ECC, it's as simple as adding an Excel from your desktop into ECC, and this, of course, once you execute the file, which is an Excel file in this case, not a text file or a Word document file, it's this Excel itself. Once you execute, of course, there's also an option to test run this file to see if everything would be okay, and you would see also in your screen all green lights, as you can see here, to tell you it's okay in the test run, and then eventually execute the actual file, and the result would look like this one in Umoja. So you see automatically the forwarding number has generated, and the status is a green light, which means everything is okay. If you take a look at the screen here, we see that all the details that are here in Umoja are the ones we've been adding to the load list, even with the defaulted line, and again, all the dangerous goods, container, break bulk, and all the details we've added before, except for the Incoterm itself is not there. But here's where we would take note of our forwarding order number. Okay, so that's the first part of the uploading of the Excel by the TM planner, and automatically now we will see how this generates in Umoja the forwarding order. So the system automatically creates the freight unit for each forwarding order in TM, and both the forwarding order and freight unit can be displayed in the TM portal, as we'll see in the screenshots. So as soon as we upload this Excel, we will see here, display forwarding order, and these are the things we're going to be learning when we're hands-on in the system in New York, going through TM and discovering how we can actually find our forwarding order navigating through TM, and then the different tabs, as you can see here, that we're not going to go in depth because this WebEx session would take 8 hours instead of just 1 hour and a half, and we'd see what each one of these means and what we can see in each one of them. As we see, the forwarding order is already in TM, and this one is also present with its own freight unit related to it. And that's just from the uploading of the Excel. So basically, this is quite simple. If you were in yesterday's session, this is also similar to what was mentioned yesterday. So here are the forwarding order and the freight units. I'll continue going on, as that was quite simple, and I know it could be repetitive from yesterday. And we'll go on to the planning stage now, also in TM for the TCC stage LOA. So again, just like for UNOE yesterday, as we saw for DAP Incoterm, the process or the steps will be exactly the same. So again, the create the freight order, vendor, and TCC stage. So again, there's a slash here, so it's the same exact process for either or, and this is also done by the Umoja system, as LOA is the equivalent to DAP Incoterm. This would lead us to the part where the assign carrier to FO occurs, and that again is also automatic by the Umoja system. And then the section here where we can manage our FOs, and Leandro was also explaining this yesterday. So although the Incoterm DAP, or here in COE LOA, this TCC stage in TM, even though the system does generate the FOs automatically, and we'll see that in a bit, and Umoja already assigns carriers to the FO, the TM planner can also make some changes to these FOs. Right? If anything has to be changed manually, the TM planner would be the one doing it. So not only in the non-LOA stage, but also for the LOA stage, the TM planner can go in and make some changes to these FOs. So this is quite simple, as the process pretty much occurs automatically. And let's go through some of the details of this. So in the COE scenario, right, the TCC stage applies to the DAP Incoterms. So whatever we would be doing with UNOE will be the same with COE. The system automatically creates the freight order used to report all events related to transportation. But this is completely managed by the TCC. Okay, based on the transportation network, the system will select the default route. So in this case, the system will select the default route between the vendor location and the delivery location, and will create as many freight orders, as legs are in the route. So this is something the system does automatically. So depending on the legs in the route that is already defaulted in the system in our master data in TM, that's how the system will generate, or the amount of freight orders that the system will generate. Same, the system also automatically assigns the business partner detail of the TCC as carrier to these freight orders. Okay, so as well, the carrier will be automatically assigned. And these freight orders that are created automatically will be in ready for execution status as well automatically. So as you see, this part of the process occurs pretty much on its own, and the TM planner connects to TM to submit the events related to each FO. And we'll see that in a bit as well, in more detail later on in our presentation. And then here, should the automatically created freight orders differ from the business partner's actual route, the TM planner can delete and recreate them to reflect the real route and to facilitate the insertion of events at a later stage. So here's what I was talking about before. So the TM planner can still go in and make changes to those FOs that are generated automatically, whether delete or recreate them. So I believe this is quite simple. If anything comes up, Leandro, or any questions or comments, also let me know. But I think I can move on to the next step.
Yes, please, Brian, proceed. Yeah.
Okay. So as we see here in the screenshot, we're still displaying our forwarding order. We have the forwarding order details, our freight unit details, and in the same document flow tab, we'll also have our freight order. And you will have to start becoming familiar with these numbers, as the numbers always begin with 2 digits that will let you remember what they mean, right? What they stand for. So you see the 2-1 for the forwarding order, the 4-1 for the freight unit, and the 6-1 for the freight order. So these are numbers that eventually you'll be seeing a lot of, and what they represent is quite important to remember. And we see here this would be our freight order for the COE LOA. Okay, so we'll move on now since we've already seen the stage for TCC LOA. Now we're going to look at the freight forwarder stage for non-LOA or ex-works Incoterm in TM as well. So things will work a bit differently here. So let's say we've already updated the Excel, uploaded it, and the system has already generated our forwarding orders and freight units. Now the difference is that the system will not automatically generate the freight orders. This is something we'll have to do ourselves, the TM planner. So what we do in this case would be to select these freight units from what is called the TM cockpit. So the freight units here will have to be selected, and the TM planner will have to manage and see which ones he or she could put together in one FO, or really manage the transportation on the freight units manually. This would eventually generate TM proposals. So let's say that we have already decided, based on the information in the cockpit for our freight units, based on the delivery dates, we have already managed to put together a couple of freight units, or we're simply working with a single freight unit and we want to organize the transportation. Once that is clear, the Umoja system, based on some of the actions we'll do in the system, will generate some proposals. So a set of proposals that we're going to have to take a look at and evaluate which ones are more useful or which ones are more beneficial, cheaper, lesser distance, or less legs in between. So we would definitely see that now in the next slide, some screenshots in the system of what that looks like. And here the TM planner would select the best proposal from all these proposals the system has generated. The system, based on our proposal, would calculate a charge estimate. And eventually, once that has been done, the system would create freight orders for the freight forwarding stage. So this would be the last step of the system here, generating the freight orders, but then the TM planner would have to, him or herself, generate the SOW in the system. So we're going to take a look at the slides that I believe explain a little in more detail, and also seeing the screenshots of the system is quite more helpful than probably just looking at this screen. But this will become very useful for you once you start becoming familiar with concepts and the system itself. One look at this poster, or this end-to-end, will help you understand where you are in the process. So here we go, we're still with the freight forwarding stage, non-LOA, and the TM planner is selecting a freight unit in the TM cockpit. So let's take a look at that screenshot. So in the COE scenario, the freight forwarder stage applies to the ex-works Incoterms. In this sense, the freight forwarder is responsible for delivering the items to the final destination. So the freight units appear in something called the transportation cockpit, filtered by profile, ex-works or DAP, as we see in this screenshot. So this one looks different from what we were seeing yesterday. We have one for COE LOA DAP and COE non-LOA ex-works. So we would have to select the one that we're looking for in terms of the one that applies for ex-works Incoterms, to see the freight units that are pending to be, let's say, worked with, that are pending to be generate a freight order for. So several of these freight units with the same pickup and destination locations can be consolidated to be transported together, as I was mentioning before. So this is why we would go to the transportation cockpit, and in this sense, we wouldn't be looking at the LOA DAP, but the other one where we would find our freight units. There's a time window of currently 7 days that would allow us to actually consolidate two freight units. So whatever dates are less than 7 days apart would allow us to join these freight units or consolidate these freight units into freight orders. And a little more detail on what we see here. So for our first line, COE, the TCC stage, would be the equivalent to the DAP Incoterm. And then the freight forwarder stage should be the equivalent to the ex-works Incoterm. So let's say we already selected the option that relates to us, which would take us to our next screen where the freight unit stages are displayed. These are freight units that have not yet been planned or managed or consolidated into freight orders. So we would see our freight units here, starting with 4.1, and something you will become very familiar with is what sort of looks like an envelope or an email with this sign below it. So unless it has a green light, it means it has not been planned yet. So all these freight units still don't have freight orders, right? There has been no transportation management organized by the TM Planner for them yet. We see also the dates here, earliest requested date, latest requested date. So this is a visual of what I'm trying to explain to you guys. So several freight units can be consolidated for transporting purposes. So in this case, we've selected both of these, as you can see here. We've selected the one ending in 400 and 401, both loading locations Durban Port and unloading locations Unmiss, and the dates that are less than 7 days apart, so we could consolidate them into one freight order. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide here, where we have already selected our best proposals. So the system displays a list of transportation proposals now that we have already selected our freight units based on the Transportation Network master data. And the transportation proposals are organized in the following way. Freight unit, legs for goods vendor, pre-main on, and legs freight forwarder stage, pre-main on as well. So we're going to be seeing now in this screenshot what this is detailing here. So as we see here, and let's just focus on this first line before we go on to the next and see what I'm discussing here. So if we're just taking a look at what is above this yellow line I have just drawn, we will realize that some of these lines have, see what I was talking about before, what looks like an envelope with a green check mark, which means they're the ones that are being planned. They're the ones that are manually being planned by the TM Planner, and those that have nothing next to them, which are right here, would be the ones that have either already been planned because they have a DAP Incoterm, but the system has already generated these freight orders by itself automatically. Okay, so we'd be looking at the ones here with the green check mark and their stages. So we see the transportation proposal numbers 11, and one below here 12. In this case, since we combined two freight units, we have two freight unit numbers, the one ending in 401 and the one in 400, with the stages that are assigned to each of these proposals. We would take a look at the means of transport column here. In this case, we have the UNOE. So in a sense, even though this is COE, if we're working with XWorks, we would be seeing a similar screen. Again, the nomenclature would be different, but the screen would be very similar when we're working with an XWorks Incoterm. This is mainly to understand what we talk about when we're talking about freight units, and then the stages, which would be the freight orders for each one of these legs and stages.
So,
yes, Leandro.
sorry, Ryan, now that we are showing the transportation cockpit, that now we have a question from Remy about the consolidation of the freight units. Okay, so Brian explained the time window, right? So we said that there's a time window of 7 days where we can be combining the freight units, and also we mentioned there has to be same source location and same destination. If the destination locations are different, okay, then the route will be a little bit different. Maybe the last leg can be different. Maybe the two freight units can be shipped together, let's say to Mombasa port, but then the last leg could be different from Mombasa to different cities, okay, let's say in Sudan. Okay, so you can still combine the freight units even if the destination is not the same, and the system will try to combine the freight units for the legs where the shipment can be combined. Okay, and we will be seeing that when we see the practical exercises next week in the system. Okay.
Thank you, Leandro. Thank you for summarizing that information. Anything else? Any other question?
We have other comments, but more on the because now we are talking about the non-LOA scenario, and we had some comments about the LOA and basically the difference between the forwarding order and the PO that is raised in order to pay the TCC for the COE equipment. Okay, so we have to distinguish. So there are two different documents. The PO you raise is to pay the troops contributing country, and here we are talking about the forwarding order that is used to initiate the transportation request. So even though both numbers start with the 21, okay, because the comment was about the same numbering, right? The PO you raise in order to pay the troops contributing country starts with 21, and also the forwarding order in TM is a document that also starts with 21. But these two are two different documents. One, the PO is to pay the TCC, and the forwarding order is to initiate the transportation planning and also to be able to submit all the related events in the carrier collaboration portal. Okay, so don't get confused with these two documents, even though they have the same numbering. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Leandro. Definitely we'll become more and more familiar with these when we start getting hands-on in the system in New York. So for now, just keep in mind that some of these numbers may look similar to others, but not necessarily the same. Okay, so basically we've gone and looked through some of the freight units, freight orders, and what it'll look like in the system when we're looking at transportation proposals. Okay, and again, TM Planner will select best proposal based on distance, duration, and etc. So there's a long list of proposals that you can look through when trying to do this manually. And then once we have already selected the best proposal, the system will create the new freight orders for the freight forwarding stage based on the proposal selected for each leg. So we would see here, once we have selected the proposal and said OK to move forward with it, the system would guide us to a screen where we would be able to see our freight orders or freight bookings, as it's said here in the system, with the document numbers beginning by 61, the mode of transport, and also source and destination locations with all the data that now has been organized into freight orders based on the transportation proposal we selected. The carrier is defaulted, as we see here, and also in the screenshot that we have attached to the slide, to Z_dummy_car until the freight is awarded and the real carrier is assigned. So remember, when we were looking at the LOA, this was done automatically. Now that we're doing the non-LOA, or the equivalent to the X-Works Incoterm, this would be done first. So the carrier is defaulted to this one, and eventually, once the freight is awarded, that would change. The system automatically calculates estimated charges, also based on the charges in the master data. And as we see here, we can take a look at the freight orders that have been generated by simply selecting one of those freight order numbers that we have been generated by the system, and see the charges. Here's the charge tab that we're talking about here, the estimated charges that have been generated at first. Okay, so let's move on now to the SOW. So a statement of work document can be downloaded from each freight order, as we see on the screen, and the SOW can also be edited and printed. It serves as an input for the freight procurement phase, as we all know. It includes the freight orders related to the same shipment. We're going to be seeing a screenshot of that, and we'll see what I'm talking about. So the SOW will look like it does here at the bottom. As we see, the forwarding order numbers will all be consolidated together based on the MOU, and that's how they're consolidated together into an SOW. And the freight orders as well will also show in our SOW here, also consolidated. So I believe that is quite okay. If there are any questions, let me know, Leandro, but I know that this was also covered yesterday, so I don't want to be too redundant and repeating the same things. Mainly the differences here is, of course, the nomenclature again and how these are grouped into SOW. So as we see here, the forwarding orders are grouped to the freight orders by MOU.
Before we move on, because there is a question regarding the scope of the statement of Word document, if it can be edited. Yes, so the document will be, you will be able to download it and edit it offline, okay? And we'll show that next week in the system. But yeah, there is a way to edit that document so that you can update it with your requirements, okay, with the particular requirements.
Okay, thank you, Leandro. So basically, we've already gone through the first parts here, the load list, our planning stage, and then we would get to our procure freight stage, which we can go through quite rapidly unless you have questions and you want me to slow down. But this is exactly as we saw yesterday before we move into the execute and monitor stage, which is the last part of our presentation. So in this case, what we're going to be seeing is what occurs in SRM when we're creating a shopping cart for freight. Right, the requisitioner would be doing so, and again, this shopping cart would be approved. So the process is very similar than the one we're used to for goods. In this case, the approver would approve the shopping cart, and then buyers select the shopping cart from the source in cockpit, create the RFX, and then offline, what would occur would be the solicitation process. Again, our color coding here also represents what module or if it's happening in a system or not. And again, in SRM, the PO for freight created by the buyer and finally also approved. So in this case, I believe this is quite a familiar process. The main difference here is that, of course, now the freight line would not be added to the shopping cart for goods, but it would be added at this point in the stage. So once the planning has been performed for the specific non-LOA case here, or as we saw yesterday, UNOE for FCA or Ex-Works Incoterms, we'd have to generate a shopping cart for freight, which would eventually be approved, and then again, eventually the PO would be created for freight as well, and this then would also affect TM in the sense that we would have to link together the approved PO for freight with the carrier assigned to it. So we'll get into that in a second. Let's just go through this screen quite rapidly, and if anything comes up or any questions come up, Leandro, just let me know and I'll stop. So as we know, the freight procurement steps in the system remain very similar as they are. The freight services are requested in a separate shopping cart, no more than the line for freight in the goods shopping cart. The SOW to be attached in the freight shopping cart can be downloaded directly from Umoja TM. So we just saw the SOW document before, which could be downloaded and also attached now to this freight shopping cart. And TM is now the single source of information for all transportation requirements. Oh, I went a bit too fast on that one. So in this sense, I'm not sure if I should spend more time here or simply move on. So I'm going to go to what would eventually affect TM, which is the next section here, but again, still belonging to the stage or phase of procurement freight. Right here at the bottom, we see TM, and now what I was talking about before, the time to assign the carrier and PO to a freight order. Sorry. So in this case, the TM freight order manager would assign the carrier and PO to the FO. So now that we already have the carrier agreed and in the PO, we would have to let TM know and somehow assign it in TM so we can link it to the FOs that have been generated before, the ones we were looking at in the system before when we did our transportation proposals. And the same role will be able to edit DFOs with routes, dates, and the new charges. So we would first assign the carrier and PO to the freight orders and then eventually edit the FOs with the actual routes, the actual dates, and the actual charges if these changed. And let's see a bit of the detail of this in the system now. Once the freight services have been awarded, the freight order TM has to be updated, and now updated with the selected carrier and the related purchase order number. Once this carrier is assigned in the FO execution status will change, as we were seeing before, for ready to execution, allowing the freight forwarders to submit related events. So until the carrier is assigned, right, the PO is linked and the carrier is assigned, the status will not change to ready for execution in the freight order, which means that the freight forwarders will not be able to submit events for that leg. And more information on the freight orders. The actual route, as we were talking about before, if the route selected by the carrier is different to the planned route that we just planned in the system previously, before requesting the shopping cart for freight or raising the shopping cart for freight, sorry, the FO has to be updated with the new route as it's used to report events. The same thing will happen with the dates and again with the charges. So the planned dates need to be updated in the freight order based on the information provided by the freight forwarder. The freight order charges also have to be updated with the actual ones appearing in the freight purchase order. The system allows, as we can see here, comparing the estimated charges and the actual charges for reporting purposes. So quite some important information that we are just going through quickly now. Before we move on to the final stage, which is the monitor and execution. So that we come to the end of our, let's say, end-to-end or a poster guide for you guys for COE, LOA, and non-LOA. And now we're going to be focusing on the TCC stage, strictly related to LOA, and then the freight forwarder stage related to non-LOA, and in what systems that would occur and who's responsible for doing what. So first we will begin with the TCC stage, and as you see here, it occurs in TM. So in this case, the events would be updated by the TM planner. So we see that in this case for LOA, the TM planner would have to go into TM and update the events. So for this particular case, they're not going to be updated in CCP, but in TM, and we'll see how that occurs in a bit. And the same thing would be for the uploading of attachments. The TM planner would have to do so through TM. So any updates on events, any submission on events would have to be done through TM by the TM planner on behalf of. And here we go. Let's check some details on that. And I believe we're still okay on time, but let's make it to the end of the presentation, and then maybe we can get some last-minute questions. Okay, so in an LOA scenario, which is the first one we're covering, transportation is completely managed by the TCC. However, and that's why we saw that the TM planner was updating events in TM, TCC will not have access to the carrier collaboration portal, and all the transportation events will be submitted by the TM planners on their behalf. Okay, so that explains why only the TM a system appeared in the screen before. So the Umoja role TS1 TM planner will update these events and will also add the attachments directly in TM. These events and attachments are also displayed in CCP. So whatever we do in one module will affect the other. And once the first event is submitted, the freight unit execution status will now change to in execution. Now, once this has been changed, or once the first event has been submitted, no changes in the route are further allowed. So we can make all the changes previous to this status change. And eventually, this is what it would look like in TM. So we see here, edit COE member plan freight order. In the execution tab, we'd have our reported events and also the option to insert events and what each one of these means. So the report event would be an expected event. in the legs, and the insert event would represent the unexpected events. So we would be able to submit these events in TM, and this is what the screen would look like depending on what we're doing. If we're simply reporting events that were expected, as we see here in the screen, or we're going to add new unexpected events. Okay, so I believe this is quite simple. The difference is that now we're doing this in TM and not going into CCP, strictly for LOA, COE LOA, and last but not least, we're going to see what happens now in the freight forwarder stage for non-LOA, very similar to what we were seeing yesterday. So in this particular case now, we do have access to CCP, but we'll see as well that the same is in TM. So in this case, the events will be updated by the freight forwarder in CCP, so the same case as was yesterday for XWorks and FCA for UNOE. So the freight forwarder would have to submit and upload any attachments or submit any events in CCP. Okay, and here I'm moving on. Okay, there you go. It was a bit slow there. And in TM, same thing can happen, but in this case would be events would be updated and submitted, and uploads would be attached by the TM planner in TM. So in this particular case, it can be done either by the freight forwarder in CCP or by the TM planner in TM, as we just saw before. So this would again be for the non-LOA freight forwarder stage. So let's go into some details here before the end of our WebEx. Freight forwarders will be provided with login credentials to the Umoja Carrier Collaboration Portal, or CCP. They will see their freight orders they are responsible for, the transportation. So once they log into CCP, these freight forwarders will be able to see those specific freight orders that they're responsible for in terms of transportation, and they will be able to submit events for those freight orders they are responsible for. All events submitted via CCP are displayed in TM, as also is vice versa. As we saw on the screen before, when submitting in TM, they were also displayed in CCP. And now, in case the vendor cannot connect to CCP, the TM planner once again can update those related events in the TM module, as we saw in the screenshot before. Once the first event is submitted, the freight order execution status in execution now will change to an execution. No changes can be added to the route or are further allowed in the route. Okay. And the also very important follow-on documents and predecessor documents. But in this case, since it's COE, we wouldn't be worrying about this stage here for the virtual goods receipt or physical goods receipt. Okay, now before I move on to this next slide, since these are just some updates we wanted to keep you up to date with, that's the end of what I wanted to cover in terms of the monitoring and execution stage for LOA and non-LOA. So if there are any questions so far, because whatever I'm going to talk about now in terms of notifications, Leandro, unless you think maybe we should go through notifications first.
Yes, I would like to add something that coming from Alex. Okay, so thank you, Alex. So Alex is indicating that for an LOA scenario, okay, the updating the events is out of the scope for MoveCon, and that we shouldn't. I mean, that steps shouldn't be done by MoveCon because all the transportation is out of control for MoveCon. Okay, so we will review that part to check if that applies, and we will amend the process accordingly. Okay, for system-wise, it's possible to do it, but we need to confirm if updating the events in TM applies for an LOA scenario or not. Okay, so but thank you, Alex, for reporting that. And please, if you want to speak up, Alex, so we can also unmute you in case you want to add anything. All right. All right. Okay, I'm gonna mute you, Alex, in case you want to add anything here. So now you can speak up, Alex.
Okay, I already sent in chat my concerns the LOA transportation is totally out of MoveCon control. So we don't have any updates on this. So transportation manager could not upload any updates. So this should be taken and not to pass wrong information to the LSD management and to others, because otherwise they will ask us what is the status of the movement, and we have no idea.
Okay, Alex.
So another issue, for the LOAs, the goods value and a lot of other stuff are not applicable, and for the LOAs, the scope of work which will be created or generated out of the freight order should be not a scope of work like for the procurement, let me say, to purchase the freight, but as a market survey request. So this should be also taken into consideration.
Okay, so thank you for the feedback. All right, so we will confirm
yes,
that.
And we have a lot of concerns right now. So far, I have 38 questions which I should pass to the Babacar.
Okay.
I don't want to keep this time.
So thank you, Alex. So yeah, so please make sure that all your concerns are directed to the project team, and we will have more time when we are there in HQ to talk about the different parts of the system. Okay.
Because the load list, you are calling load list is Excel load list. It's totally unusable by MoveCon. We cannot spend like 5 hours to create this table, which is not necessary for us. And the way how it's right now presented, it's totally unacceptable.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, we also heard from the project team that they are working on a.
Right now, we have presentation on the, let me say, old version, which is not acceptable by MoveCon. We are not going to use this table.
Yeah, but the thing is that we understand that they are working in a different solution, but it's not defined yet, and we understood that the concepts are going to remain very similar, right? So we are going to still have the source location destination.
This is the first step to create. Sorry for I'm interrupted. This is the first step to create forwarding order. Yeah. And if the first step is not defined yet, how we can proceed with all others?
No, but Alex,
this is the main step. And if we don't, we are listening only that we need to upload this information, and we need to create this Excel sheet, and we don't have, let me say, information on this and possibility to do this.
We completely understand your concerns. That's why we stressed at the beginning that this
is
but
if
the
process. The issue is like this. If the first step will not be possible, how all the other steps will be done?
Yeah, I understand your concern. And again, once it goes live, maybe the process will be different already. I know Babacar is working on that.
How to go live if we are not able to create the first step?
Okay, it's fine. So we definitely understand your concern, and I'm sure that when we get to New York, Babacar is on. So maybe if he wants to join in and put some closure on these concerns, we completely understand your concerns.
Yeah. So we have. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, Alex. Yeah. So I think we had received up to the pit a list of concern or feedback, and the main one was this lack of usability from this upload form. And as Alex is aware, we're working on it. However, the design that has been validated by business is this design that's going to leverage this forwarding order upload form that was demonstrated by the training team. That's why the official design says that the COE part starts with the upload of the forwarding order using either the forwarding order template or creating directly from the application by using a template or using the creation screen. We're working with MoveCon to streamline and improve the creation process, and we hope that there'll be something before go live that will help you, ease the process of inputting the data into the system. And Alex is well aware with this because we spent yesterday afternoon discussing it. So I think we can take it offline. This is the official design, but we're working to improve it and make it easier for the users. hope it answers the question.
Okay.
Okay. So do you have any other questions?
No, I don't think so. So I think we still have, I think, one slide more based on the questions and feedback from yesterday. So maybe then we can show it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Leandro. And thanks, Babacar, as well, for clarifying. And definitely we can continue and finish the session now in the last 10 minutes with, as Leandro was saying, something that was requested or discussed yesterday, which are the email notifications in CCP. So email notifications are sent automatically when some specific events are reported or overdue. So we were taking a look at this before the WebEx session and put this together. Okay, so for the unexpected events, an email notification to the TM planner, requisitioner, and RNI is sent when any of this type of event is reported in the sense of delay, damage, loss, and etc. So that's what the unexpected events are. So there will be an email notification that will be sent out when there is any one of these unexpected events. Then procurement division will also be notified in case the unexpected event is either cost change or route change. And for our planned events that we were looking at as well in the slide before, handover document event, when the event is reported, an email is sent to RNI, contact in the destination plant, and if the event is overdue more than 48 hours from the plan date, an email is sent to MoveCon. So I know because yesterday there were some concerns in terms of how there would be notifications or communication between one module in another or one role in another in terms of these submitted events. So we took a look at that and the email notifications that would be sent depending on the type of event that we're submitting, whether it's unexpected or planned. And we found the following. So we'll be sharing this PowerPoint with you at the end of the session as well as the recording. And we just wanted to at least cover those concerns with this slide. And then basically to finalize the documentation sent as well. So we have these planned events handover and documentation sent event only for main carriage leg. When the event is reported, an email is sent to the RNI contact in the destination plant. And if the event is overdue more than 10 days from the plan date, an email is sent to MoveCon. So eventually, I believe this will answer some of the concerns that that were raised yesterday. And finally, the also documentation complete and custom clearance events, only for main carriage as well. The event is overdue more than 10 days from the planned date. An email is also sent to MoveCon. So we see that communication does occur based on the event that we're submitting. Okay, this presentation that we'll share with you, I won't go one by one through this, but also has the roles and the main function of each one of these roles that we're going to be looking a lot during the week in New York and now during the WebEx sessions, and as well as the acronyms for presentations. So I know that some of these may be new, so we have added a small slide here with some of the acronyms and their definitions. So some of them you may be familiar with and others not so much. And here we see the forwarding order, LOA, FU, FO, and so on, SOW. So this could definitely help you understand when looking at all these acronyms what they stand for. So that's the end of our presentation here, the end of this WebEx session for day 3. Thank you guys for participating. I'm not sure if there's maybe one last minute question there, if there's any closing remarks to be made. Again, thank you, Babacar, for clarifying some of the concerns that Alex had, which are completely understandable. And I really can't wait to start sharing all these insights when we're there hands-on in the system so we can all learn from each other. So if there are no further questions or no closing comments, that will be the end of this session.
So thank you, the training team. Not a closing session, but just thank you for the hard work. And as you said, you will send the questionnaire for the assessment and also the training, the material that you presented today, so people can go through it again and get a better understanding of what has been discussed this morning. So thank you to all of you, and Alex, see you in the afternoon.
All right, thank you, Babacar.
Yeah, thank you all, and also you will be receiving the recorded session in case you have any colleague that couldn't attend. Besides the presentation, we will be sending the recorded session so that they can follow the session offline. Okay. So thank you very much, and see you tomorrow in the Troops WebEx session.